In full disclosure, I don't have children. Human children, that is. I don't want human children, and at this age, I will certainly never give birth to a human child. Because of this, I do not have particularly strong opinions on what pregnant people should choose to do during pregnancy or childbirth, or what parents should do after childbirth. In fact, my strongest opinion on this is that a pregnant person has the right to do whatever they want with their body. And we as a society should provide pregnant people with all of the resources and education and options to allow them to choose the healthiest options for themselves and for their fetus and or future baby. I know, super, super hot take. Despite that being my own position, over the years, I have still been interested in the data surrounding certain decisions a pregnant person can make. Because I think more data and more research and more conversation about this stuff helps everyone make better decisions. So while I think a pregnant person has the right to do what they want, I'm still interested in research that explores, for instance, the drawbacks, if there are any, of alcohol and other drug use during pregnancy, or the benefits of breastfeeding over feeding babies formula, or whether giving birth at home is any more dangerous than giving birth in a hospital. That last one has been particularly contentious over the years, especially in skeptic circles. For instance, in 2014, Dr. Amy Tudor, the skeptical OB, published her own reading of a particular study in order to support her claim that home births are wildly more dangerous than hospital births, an assertion that was quickly corrected by my statistician friend, Jamie Bernstein, for Grounded Parents, who read the actual study and put the numbers into context. The back and forth continued through hundreds of comments and dozens more blog posts, and I'm not sure if anyone ever actually changed their mind about anything. The two sides boiled down to home births increase the risk to the mother and the baby, and any increase in risk is bad and should be avoided. And the increase in risk is very small for most mothers compared to other risks they take. And home birth lowers other risks that make home birth a perfectly acceptable choice for an educated and prepared person. I'll get into a little bit more of what all that means in a bit, but I want to say that, in fact, today I am not going to be talking about the relative risks of home birth, in which reasonable people can disagree on what the best option is for any one person who is giving birth. Because unfortunately, there's a newer trend in giving birth that is so risky for the parent and child that there is no reasonable argument in favor of it. The only debate to be had is how to stop people from doing it. I'm talking about Freebirth. This week, The Guardian published a years-long investigation that has revealed the utter depravity behind social media influencers who are selling the idea that it's not just better to give birth at home, but better to avoid any kind of prenatal screening before giving birth far away from any medical experts. Hospitals, doctors, nurses, and even midwives or doulas are strictly forbidden. And if the parent or baby dies, well, that's just what was meant to happen. And if anyone brings it up, they will be quickly banned and silenced. Now, I usually encourage people to click the link in the description below to go to the transcript, read all of the sources that I quote, just so you know that I'm not making stuff up. But today I'm going to do something rare that will probably negatively impact this video's reach in the algorithm. I really encourage you to pause this video right now and go read the Guardian investigation in full if you think you can stomach it. Because it isn't just that they gathered a lot of damning information about this movement, it's also just really well written, and the ending absolutely snapped my little heart in half. And in this video, I am going to spoil that ending. Okay, so spoiler alert given. Okay, so there are these two women at the heart of this. This movement is a word you could use. Cult, maybe. Scam, definitely. Even though we usually think of scams as being perpetrated by people who know it's a scam. And I don't necessarily think that's happening here. Emily Saldaya and Yolande Norris Clark are ex-doulas. Doulas being people who guide people through big life events like pregnancy and childbirth. The term isn't necessarily strictly regulated, depending on where you are. In the US and Canada, where Saldaya and Norris Clark are from, respectively, there is no requirement to meet any particular level of education or training to call yourself a doula. That said, there are a lot of organizations out there that provide certifications in order to help people find doulas who are appropriately trained to do things like build a birth plan or do breathing exercises or go over birthing positions. And crucially, to recognize when a person is in need of actual medical help, because a doula is not a medical personnel. Instead of doing any of those things, though, Saldaya and Norris Clark came up with a money-making scheme. The Freebirth Society, which encompasses a podcast with millions of downloads, an Instagram account with 133,000 followers, a YouTube channel with 25 million views, and a course of pre-recorded videos that cost hundreds of dollars. Now, the article does a great job of describing Saldaya and Norris Clark, but I'm going to just give you 2 paragraphs to sum them up, and the whiplash this gave me. By 2020, Saldaya and Norris Clark had built a lucrative partnership. Norris Clark was the charismatic intellectual one. With her photogenic brood of children, she sold the promise of ease to the burned-out mothers following her social media accounts. Her births were pain-free and orgasmic, and she had far more children than most people do. Yet Norris Clark never seemed exhausted or burdened by them. In comparison, Saldaya was abrasive, but unlike Norris Clark, who could seem scatterbrained and easily distracted, Saldaya was always focused on growing the business. Friends say Saldaya often took her ideological cues from her business partner. After Norris Clark decided she did not believe in gravity, Saldaya announced she was no longer round earth committed. When Norris Clark said she no longer believed in germ theory, Saldaya told friends she did not wash her hands. When Norris Clark said she no longer identified as a feminist and wished to submit to her husband, Saldaya quietly stopped marketing the podcast as Radical Feminist. Okay, I'm sorry, but if you have 2 people and the more intellectual one doesn't believe in gravity or germ theory, then you need to get the other one on a ventilator immediately, because there's a good possibility she's going to forget to breathe any moment now. The Guardian describes many of the women who joined the Freebirth Society only to experience complications during childbirth, because of course that happened. As a reminder, it's not even just that these idiots tell people not to have any medical support present at birth. It's that they tell them to experience a wild pregnancy, which means no ultrasounds, no genetic screening, no prenatal check-ins at all, and no emergency plans for what to do if something goes wrong. Hell, they don't even learn how to identify when something has gone wrong, since Saldaya and Norris Clark even state outright that babies should choose to begin their lives. So if they aren't breathing after birth, it's meddling and sabotage to resuscitate them. Yes, seriously, they said that. In anecdote after anecdote, The Guardian cites women who fully trusted Saldaya and Norris Clark throughout their pregnancies and begged them for help when things went wrong at the end, only for those women to tell them, hey, it's fine, just relax, everything's going to be great. And when it didn't turn out fine, the women were kicked out of the Freebirth Society and never spoken of again. Incredibly, this actually works as a business plan. These women have allegedly made millions of dollars from this grift despite having actual deaths on their hands, because most women who give birth will do so with minor or no complications. Humans thrived for a very long time with no medical interventions for precisely this reason. Sure, we evolved to cook our babies a little longer, so their heads got really big before shoving them through a relatively small passage, but that extra intelligence was worth it, evolutionarily speaking, even if 1% to 2% of people died in childbirth. The women who didn't die delivering the first child were more likely to go ahead and successfully have a bunch more children, making up for the women who did die. That's why when it comes to the statistics on home births, the research seems to suggest that it's generally safe if prenatal screening shows both the parent and the fetus are healthy and correctly positioned, if there is a plan in place to get to a hospital in case things go wrong, which happens in like 1 out of 10 cases, and if the parent has already successfully delivered a child previously. And that's why it's so dangerous that the Freebirth Society gets rid of all of that. All of those modifiers are gone. They insist that it's extraordinarily abnormal for a woman to be pregnant with a fetus that she can't safely give birth to. But that's the beauty of modern medicine. We don't need to sacrifice 1% to 2% of pregnant people because of a quirk of evolution. I don't have to wander through life blind because I was born with fucked up eyeballs. We don't need to let people suffer or die of AIDS or polio or several kinds of cancer. Science has come up with ways to treat these things. So why did the Freebirth Society ladies insist that we should just give up that modern medicine? You could argue it's purely a grift and that they don't believe what they're saying, but here's where I wrote in the end of the Guardian article for you. The con was invented by Saldaya, but she lacked credibility because her one child at the time was born with medical intervention. So she brought on Norris Clark, who had already had a gaggle of kids with no such intervention. For her next pregnancy, Saldaya tried to free birth, but she had to go to the hospital for a procedure before she could return home to give birth, which meant that it didn't count. This year, pregnant with her third child, Saldaya really went for it. Wild pregnancy with no prenatal care and a plan to avoid all medical interventions. Her due date was this past August, and she was silent on social media as that date came and went, before finally revealing on August 25th that her son was not born alive. It's worth noting that earlier in the Guardian piece, Saldaya admits that if a baby is born alive but with complications that she fails to treat and it then dies, she will avoid accountability by telling the authorities that the baby was born already dead. So it's a grift, and it's a lucrative one at that, but it's clearly one that Saldaya believes in. Or believed in. Maybe she's in the process of changing her mind right now, but in the meanwhile, all of the social media pages are still up, the grift goes on. All of this hasn't happened in a vacuum. It's a story that I've been telling for decades now. First, you remove agency from women, add in societal pressures. In place of agency, tell women some fantasy about magical powers that allow them to transcend these challenges. Then blame them for suffering and dying because they just didn't use their magic the right way. This is how it worked with The Secret, the law of attraction, where women were told that we could have whatever we dream of just by wishing hard enough. And if you die of cancer, well, guess you should have wished harder. It's how it worked with Jenny McCarthy's anti-vaccine grift, where women were told that as mothers, they should just know what doctor's advice they should reject. And if their child has autism, it's because they weren't good enough tiger moms. Their magical power failed, and that's why they're miserable now. And it's how this works. Women are told that their bodies are magical, that it's their superpower to be able to gestate and give birth to a perfect baby. And if they can't, well, that's their own fault. Radical responsibility is the term that Saldaya and Norris Clark use. One of their followers showed The Guardian her notes while listening to their podcast. Processing fears. What would happen if my baby died? What would happen if I died? I would take full responsibility. On the 4th of April, 2023, radical responsibility is the way for the safety of me and baby. That woman nearly died trying to give birth at home. She lost so much blood, she had to be rushed to the hospital for a transfusion. All of these grifts start with that removal of agency. I don't have kids, like I said, but I do have a few friends with kids. Not many, but a few. And among them, I know at least 2 who had horrifically traumatic experiences giving birth in the hospital. When I say traumatic, I mean that they have spent years in therapy doing the work to fix what trusted medical professionals did to them. They were violated, they were injured, they were terrified at a time when society tells us, you're supposed to be filled with love and joy and excitement for the beginning of a new life. I thought it was weird that I know not that many parents, but I do know several who had this experience. So I did a quick search. The first study I found stated that consistent data suggests about 10% of women experience traumatic births in the Netherlands. And if you don't know why I'm emphasizing the Netherlands, you've never had to get medical care in the United States, where we have the highest rate of maternal mortality of all high-income countries, with more than 80% of those deaths being preventable. Nearly 2 out of 3 maternal deaths in the United States occurred during the postpartum period. The Netherlands, like every other developed nation, provides medical care for pregnant people via national insurance. The United States does not, nor do we have any guaranteed doctor's visits, nor any guaranteed postpartum home visits to check on the health of the parents and babies. Additionally, the United States has rates of C-sections about twice the optimal number. In 1985, The Lancet published a landmark report by the World Health Organization stating that there was no justification for any region in the world to have a C-section rate higher than 10% to 15%. In the United States, it's 33%. That's a problem because C-sections, while extremely common, are still major surgeries that have potential complications and serious knock-on effects. Infections, bleeding, embolism, recovery time, even the higher costs. But as a 2017 paper highlights, in the United States, we hand out C-sections like candy thanks to systemic factors like hospitals that prioritize maintaining a schedule over a woman and her child's comfort and health, which is perhaps reflected in the statistic that, quote, male physicians and physicians practicing in university settings are associated with higher rates of C-sections. The report also documents the troubling racial and socioeconomic factors of who gets a C-section. People of color are more likely to get a C-section than white people, and immigrants are more likely to get a C-section than native-born Americans. Having trouble with the English language is a risk factor, which really makes me wonder how much of this is all due to members of the medical establishment treating women, especially certain women they may see as beneath them, as objects, as problems to be solved as efficiently as possible. These are all factors that make women want to look outside of the medical establishment. Why am I paying through the nose for treatment that is so bad that I might end up getting a major surgery that I don't want or need, or so bad that I might end up feeling so violated and destroyed that I need therapy and never want a doctor to touch me again? That's the loss of agency that a good con artist recognizes. The gap where they can slide in and make some coin, whether they believe what they're selling or not. All of which brings me to this. How do we stop the Freebirth Society? Back in 2018, the Daily Beast did a story about the Freebirthers, but it had some differences from the recent Guardian piece. For instance, one of the women featured in the Daily Beast article admitted to the Guardian that she had lied to the Daily Beast in order to downplay Saldaya and Norris Clark's involvement in the death of her newborn. The Daily Beast also highlighted a group of skeptics who actively tried to stop the Freebirth Society by posting on their forums under sock puppets and reaching out to expecting mothers to convince them to see a doctor. Because this was the internet, some of those skeptics reached out to tell those mothers that they were killing their own babies, that they should be punished, that they should be in prison. Others said that Saldaya and Norris Clark should be punished or in prison. But now we're getting into this tricky territory. As I said at the top, I don't think we should punish a pregnant person for what they do to their body, regardless of how it may affect a fetus. I think that's a slippery slope to women having no bodily autonomy at all. Once a baby is born, how do we determine that a parent deserves punishment for its subsequent death? We need to establish that the baby was born alive, that the life could have been saved, that the parent chose to let it die or directly, actively caused its death. I know we can always come up with cases where we can say this hypothetical situation would be a slam dunk guilty verdict in court, but there are so many gray areas and so many ways that we go down that slope once we decide it's okay to prosecute a woman for a tragic birth outcome. As for Saldaya and Norris Clark themselves and any other leader who preaches this sort of dangerous misinformation, it's still tricky. They keep changing their titles and disclaimers to insist that they're not giving medical advice and that every individual woman is responsible for her own actions after listening to their confident advice on their podcasts and Instagram stories and classes. I don't know what can or should be done from a criminal perspective, but with RFK Jr. running our health services and other sociopathic billionaires running the platforms that these women are using to spread these lies, I don't have any hope that anything is going to be done anytime soon anyway. I think that the only truly clear solution is the one that seems equally unrealistic, but in fact it is realistic on a long enough timescale. Before the con artists, before the magical thinking, came the removal of agency. We need to educate people about their bodies at a young age, give them the tools to control their own reproduction, provide them with food, shelter, and an income, set them up with comprehensive single-payer healthcare that prioritizes preventative care and wellness checks and postnatal care for parents and their babies. If we do that, we don't have to worry about how to stop con artists. The con artists would never have found an essential gap in our society to fill. Hey everybody, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. If you loved the video, please subscribe. And if you think the world could use more videos like this and you happen to have a few bucks laying around, head to patreon.com/Rebecca and join an awesome community of nerds like the people whose names you see on the screen right now. Thanks.